So native plants for Adirondack landscapes. All you missed was this lovely monarch on a blazing star. That's actually a rough blazing star, Liatris aspera. So we're just going to make sure we're all kind of on the same page about native plants and invasives, and then moving on with talking about alternatives and landscaping. Alrighty, so again, just making sure we're all on the same page with what a native is. They're found growing naturally in a specific area. So, this is where, we can talk, this could be its own talk, but, everything is native to somewhere. And so sometimes people are interested in talking about, just Adirondack natives versus New York natives, maybe Northeast natives, and so forth. So you just have to make sure you're on the same wavelength essentially with someone. If you're talking about natives, if they say, something is native and you're like, no, it's not, and maybe it's from Texas. Well, maybe they were using the term to kind of refer to a US native versus say a New York native. So again, it's just kind of what you're interested in, but it's a good thing to just kind of be aware of if you're looking for native plants, especially if you're at a larger store where they might have a big section labeled as native. And lots of times, that might be a larger, broader use of the term than you're interested in. So you might have to, have educated yourself a little bit in advance. There are some really great resources online if you want to kind of dial that down. I know APIP has some. These are some other great ones. BONAP is the Biota of North America. That's kind of the go-to place for maps of native plants. The New York Flora Association has an atlas, and this is really the go-to if you want to be very particular, where it will actually show you by county in New York State what is considered native. So that's for the kind of the most particular, and then we could go up to something. Go Botany is by the Native Plant Trust, which used to be New England Wildflower Society. And they have a really great user-friendly website where you can search and see maps to see what's native. So lots of resources available. Just remember that just because a plant is growing somewhere, it doesn't mean it's native. I get that question a lot, like, oh, well, I see the lilacs all on the side of the road. They must be native. And they're not. They've been planted there and spread. Again, some people really want to dial down into talking about cultivars and whether or not they are considered as natives, and we're not going to get stuck on that today. I will have some cultivar options in the talk today, but again, that's kind of up to you and to educate yourself if you're interested in straight species natives or cultivars, and again, where they're grown as to whether or not, they've been grown down in South Carolina and shipped up, or if they've been grown locally. We could kind of, again, go on and not really get to talking about the plants themselves. So just kind of putting it out there for those of you interested in this topic, like I am, right? I could talk about nativars for days, but that's not what I'm here to do. So there is lots of work out there and lots more learning to do if you're interested in really kind of pursuing the specifics of natives and their benefits further. And this is just an example of some research. Oh, excuse me, one sec. Where, again, it's not always clear, in this case, this was a study out of Mount Cuba Research Center. The hummingbirds actually preferred the Didyma, the Monarda didyma, which is bee balm, the Jacob Klein cultivar, drastically over just the plain species. So, 273 to 22. So it's not always cut or dry to say that a straight species is, necessarily better in terms of maybe a pollinator garden. There is definitely much to kind of to think about and learn. To the point where you can even buy, I was very surprised when this came in the mail one day from one of the growers, a cultivar of Virginia creeper. So they really are, working on getting these native plants out there kind of for wider use. Okay, enough about that, right? So these are not natives in this planting, but we can think about it. Now, why do we spend so much time worrying about what isn't native? What do we want to put in our yard versus maybe a conservation project? Well, there are lots and lots of reasons. Native plants are really great for protecting New York's biodiversity. We really rely on them as a key part of our food web, connecting the energy from the sun to insects, to plants, and so forth. So they're very, very important ecologically. And then also, they can, help us in terms of saving time and things like that when working in our yards, with the idea that they're going to be lower maintenance, having evolved here. Now, low maintenance is in big quotes because that doesn't mean no maintenance. It just means less maintenance, because if you're planting something that's meant to grow in the area, you shouldn't have to work so hard to keep it alive. Natives are used a lot of times in protecting waterways for dealing with stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion to protect our area lakes. And then another big part with natives, and the main part we'll talk about today, is helping to stop the spread of invasives. So over 80% of the invasives we're battling these days pretty much got their start being sold in nurseries for gardens and landscapings. And so when I say I mean, plants, not other types of invasives. But again, a lot of people might be drawn to natives because they're interested in pollinator gardens or helping the bees. I know this is kind of hard to see, but this is essentially just a list about plants and research showing you the number of butterfly and moth species supported. Again, so if you're interested in kind of birds and those food web connections, this helps you kind of know which plants you would want to prioritize for planting in your yard. And I show you this because, the #1 plant is goldenrod. And you can lose a lot of gardeners when you say that. So, it really all depends on where you're coming from with this. If you're kind of more, if you think of yourself as more of a traditional gardener, you might think, oh gosh, no, I don't want goldenrod. If you're coming at this from more of a, ecological standpoint, not the traditional gardener, you might think, great, sure, I'll do it. So, we're really all, doing this to try to improve, and support the ecology of our backyards and communities. But we do have to recognize we're coming at this from different directions. So, sometimes that's where cultivars or nativars can help. They make, shorter, more compact, better behaved goldenrods that you can kind of start with in a garden. Versus, more of a wild native goldenrod that you think of that might take over pretty aggressively. So, and of course, that depends on the amount of space you have. Maybe you have a large area, and so you have room for that, or maybe you don't. So again, you really just kind of do what is going to work for you. And of course, we want natives for the birds. Again, there's been some research, mainly by Doug Tallamy, a name that many of you might be familiar with already, but just about, the number of caterpillars it takes for chickadees, which is not pictured here. I don't have a chickadee picture. This is my sparrow from my garden, but, the number of caterpillars it takes to raise a clutch of chickadees. So, they're saying somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars just to raise one clutch of chickadees in the spring. So that's a lot of caterpillars that you need if you want to have chickadees in your yard. And so you're going to need plants for those caterpillars to eat. Another reason that I like, sometimes people might be interested in natives is they can really provide a sense of regional identity. Imagine planting this, out front of the APIP office in Keene Valley or something, right? It wouldn't, you would just kind of see it and say, well, that doesn't look very Adirondack-y. So again, they can be really important in providing a sense of place and continuity, as well, kind of more of an emotional connection for some of us, not necessarily always, just talking about ecology. Again, the idea that they've, evolved here. I mean, lots of times my plants get snowed on and, you know, they're just fine. I'm not going to have to worry about them. This is just a little more, again, about their roots and talking about, you know, not only do they, you know, help with biodiversity and keep out invasives, but they're, you know, they're just really important for a number of things. You get a lot of bang for your buck with natives. And here, this just shows how deep their roots are and what that can do to reduce erosion compared to just something like a traditional, you know, turf grass, which is shown all the way on the left with those little tiny roots. So we want to try to have more areas with some nice natives and less lawn. And this just shows you some examples of some Adirondack landscapes where you can do that. Up top, where, you know, there's some great native plants along that shoreline, and then there's still a lawn area. So it still looks, you know, nice and neat. It doesn't kind of look unkept, but you're still really getting that benefit right along the shoreline. And then again, when we have some of these homes, you know, on very steep slopes, in the mountains there, again, trying to be sure to really fill those steep slopes with good, strong natives to be able to hold those soils and keep an erosion from happening. Alrighty, so back to those invasive plants. And again, just to remind you that about 80% of those invasives we're battling, unfortunately, got their start in nurseries because we didn't realize how invasive they were going to be. So what is an invasive species? Just like I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about what is a native, what is an invasive, okay? So it's going to be non-native to the ecosystem under consideration and, you know, cause some sort of harm, whether that could be measured economically, environmentally, or human health. So the caveats there, right, are that it's, you know, the ecosystem under consideration. So again, just like a native, you know, a plant could be native to somewhere and not somewhere else. You know, an invasive could be invasive here, but not necessarily in another location. And I wish you could all just like unmute and holler out what that is in the purple, but it'd be chaos. But hopefully it's recognizable to someone or many of you, and that's purple loosestrife. So give yourself a thumbs up if you got it right. But I think the trick here is that the only invasive in the photo? I know it's early, maybe you need some more coffee, but you know, and when I took this, I was just drawn to the purple loosestrife. But that yellow all around is that wild parsnip that then has come up more and more. And a lot of people aren't aware of it. And so they go out and they weed whack or they do maintenance and they get the sap all over themselves. And then they're, you know, having this reaction when the sunlight hits it and they're burning and they're thinking, I didn't see any poison ivy, you know, what did I get into? But this people will call it poison parsnip, or, you know, not to be confused with hogweed, giant hogweed, or cow parsnip or wild parsnip. There's a lot of names for it. But this is the guy now too that's really been spreading. And there's been more info out there about it recently, I think. But that's just another invasive in here, right? And I won't tell you the story, well, I will, right? About when my mom sees this, she's like, oh, that's so pretty. Those pretty purple flowers, right? And I mean, yeah, that's your first reaction. And that's why they came over here, they were sold, right? We were landscaping with them before we realized how they could take over the wetlands, how they could alter, you know, the soil structure and the chemistry and make problems for amphibians and just, you know, the more and more research. So, you know, now we know. It's kind of like how I, you know, think about, you know, just now we know we can do better. So, you know, if you have some invasives on your property, don't despair if they were there before you got it, maybe, right? You know, it's, if you have them, you have them. We can talk about that some more later, but it's kind of like a moving forward thing. Now that we know, let's try to do better. And there's lots of different ways that these invasives can disrupt the ecosystem, you know, disrupting the food chain, you know, soil chemistry, erosion, the list goes on depending on what it is. Up top is Oriental bittersweet, which will choke out trees. Again, and this one was spread, it has these beautiful berries that people love to use for wreath making, right? They love to make wreaths out of it. I think Martha Stewart had it on her mantle on like the cover of one magazine one year so that everybody needed it, right? So there are, things that can just kind of happen that we don't realize that can really, increase the spread of these things. But if you've got bittersweet, growing over your backyard or your fence, you're going to know you don't want it. It's pretty aggressive stuff. And the same with the Japanese knotweed pictured there. If you recognize that one, often going along our creeks, again, people that keep bees love Japanese knotweed because it's a great source of pollen for their bees, and they're doing everything they can for their bees right now. So, sometimes it could be hard to convince someone to get rid of their knotweed. If you wanted to get rid of it on your property, but they had it on theirs, they might want to keep it because of their bees. So, again, it's not always, unfortunately, black or white. There are some gray areas sometimes. I mean, of course, I would say get rid of it anyway and plant something else for your bees. But, if someone's livelihood is, depending on their bees, it's not really, up to me. Alrighty, and again, there's economic costs. If the environmental costs kind of, don't woo you, maybe you're a money person. So, this research, let's see, they cost, over 120 billion. That was from research a long time ago now. If we guess that, it's increased at the cost that the housing market's gone up this year, let's say, that number's really up there. So again, we're spending big bucks getting rid of these things. This map I put up is just from, this is a DEC giant hogweed map. Again, they really have to prioritize their efforts. They have, limited availability, resources. And so hogweed is something that they prioritize just because of the public health impact, right? How bad the burns could be, how dangerous hogweed is. That is one that they actively manage versus looking to their partners, the prisms like APIP, to maybe be able to manage some of the other ones. So how do we get here, right? How do we get from this neat row of burning bush along the house to these photos of it out in the woods, right? Well, it's in my yard. I mulch around it. I mow around it. It hasn't moved. It's not invasive. Well, that's because you're mowing around it and mulching around it and keeping it under control. When you don't notice, when the berries have been taken to the woods by some birds and there's no one there to keep an eye on it, this is the kind of thing that can happen. And that's just one example. But these invasives are all going to share some common characteristics. They can grow quickly, rapidly. They're very effective at seed dispersal. They have long-lived seeds. They have all of these life histories that make it easy to invade. And just some common ones that you might be familiar with, garlic mustard, purple loosestrife we've talked about, Phragmites, all along the interstate. A lot of times you can see a lot of that. Honeysuckle, bittersweet, the list goes on. And you might think, well, who would sell these things? Well, I was in the store one day that won't be named, and I saw these cute little boxes of plants for bird and wildlife. And sure enough, it was some shrubby honeysuckle. Now, this was a few years ago, and we're going to talk about these things have actually been banned from sale at this point. But, just not that long ago, they were still available for folks to buy and purchase and plant in their landscape on purpose, believe it or not. Whereas I was out there like trying to pull them all out from my hedgerow, people were still buying them. Okay, so there were some invasive plant regulations that were enacted in 2014. Well, I don't know. Look, that's funny. I have 2015 here, but this little list says 2014. So we'll see. But either way, it was a while ago now. And so I don't know if people are familiar with this or not, but essentially the state went through a process and they ranked plants based on their invasiveness. And then they either prohibited them or regulated them. So all of the prohibited species could no longer be sold, and the regulated ones could still be sold, but had to have a label. So if you've been to a garden center and you have seen a plant with a label that says this plant is invasive, then that is one of these regulated plants. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then hopefully the garden center you visit doesn't even sell the regulated ones, and that's great. So these are all some of the prohibited ones. So these are ones that you won't find for sale, or you should not find for sale. You know, and a lot of these are things that I don't think you'd be looking for sale anyway, like garlic mustard. I don't know of anyone that goes looking for garlic mustard, but that's not to say someone hasn't. You know, lesser celandine, mugwort, mile a minute. You know, these are all plants that, you know, you shouldn't be missing, let's say, you know, that they've been prohibited. Now, these are kind of the big guys that are still sold. So despite the fact that these are quite invasive, you can purchase them for landscaping. So these are the ones that should be labeled as invasive at the garden center, and that hopefully you will know to avoid buying, and to be sure to buy either just you know, just an alternative that's not invasive, or maybe even one step better, one of these native alternatives that I will suggest. And this is just to give you a little idea that this is part of the behind the scenes rankings that the state used on these plants. And so you might say, oh, well, maybe they're still sold because they weren't really like all that bad. They weren't all that invasive. But this is just to show you that's not the case. These are the rankings. That these plants that are regulated and still sold are all very high or high. And if I compare that to, here are some of the numbers from those prohibited species, you know, they're all pretty much the same numbers, or higher. So it's not a matter that these regulated plants are like, you know, not so invasive and it's okay to still buy them. It would still be good not to. It's more of a matter that, right, everything's a compromise, and this was a, you know, a really big piece of legislation that got through and is very important. And, you know, both sides had to give and take some in order to get it going. So Norway Maple, first up, you know, the Crimson King Norway Maple is so popular still with those nice, you know, red purple leaves. We had a beautiful one at our property in Hartford. And one of the first things I did was have it cut down and removed. And all my neighbors, I think, thought I was crazy. They were like, who is this person that just moved in and cut down her giant Norway maple? But I wanted it out of there. I pulled out our burning bush. Oh gosh, I don't even know what else. We still had, I mean, we cut down a lot of our, you know, shrubby honeysuckle and stuff too. But when you have acreage, you know, it can be hard to get rid of all your invasives. So you definitely have to prioritize and not, you know, not kill yourself trying to get rid of all of them. You just kind of do what you can do. But here's some great examples of other trees that you could plant instead of a Norway maple, you know, nice big shade trees. And again, if you really want that kind of purple leaf color, there is a cultivar of a chokecherry, a Canada Red, that has those really nice purple leaves as well, if that's really kind of what you're after. Black locust, again, you know, still, you know, everywhere. But if you have black locust, again, like I did on my property, you know how quickly they spread, and how if you don't keep up on your mowing, you're going to have a lawn of black locust seedlings in no time. So again, there's a number of different other options for trees. You know, these options all have white flowers and are showy like a black locust. But again, it really depends on, you know, what you wanted the plant for as to what your alternative is. You know, did you want it for the height, the shade, the color? You know, why did you kind of want this tree? And then that way you can really find an alternative that truly is an alternative and works for you. Chinese silvergrass, miscanthus, another very popular invasive ornamental grass. And again, we have so many native grasses that are great alternatives. This one in the photo here is a little thin. It was like growing in a pot still, but if you can see at the very top, that's big blue stem. It's tall. It's like 8 feet. So we've got tall grasses, you know, anything down to, you know, 2, 3 feet, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7, all of the different ranges. So lots of options there instead of planting that grass. Here's some other grass examples, some northern dropseed on the left, very nice kind of tuft-like grass. Little blue stem on the right is always beautiful in the fall with the sun hitting it and those seed heads. Switchgrass gets a nice red color. This is the panicum, and again is available in a number of selections if you want, a little more red or purple coloring versus just the more green traditional, which even does get red in the fall. I mean, even just the straight species will color up. Instead of Japanese virgin's bower and winter creeper, we have some nice native vines. Now, we didn't really spend a lot of time on this at the beginning, but just because, right, there's like native and invasive, and then there's still something that's native, but maybe like really aggressive or a nuisance. And so, I mean, wild grape or trumpet creeper, really any of these are not something you necessarily want to be planting in a small space. I mean, these are pretty aggressive spreaders, but so are those invasives they're replacing. So again, you have to really think through what's going to work for you. But these are all beautiful native vines that we could be using instead. In my photos, that's the virgin's bower, our native clematis up top, and that's our native trumpet honeysuckle down below. Burning bush. This is one of the still very, very popular shrubs used in the landscape. And again, there are a number of other alternatives for that red fall color. These were actually just leaves from the nursery one fall. Not sure if you can see, but the burning bush leaves, are on the lower left. There's like 3 of them in a row on my sheet there. And then those were all other leaves from native shrubs at the nursery in their fall color. So whether it was the dogwoods, the viburnums, I had some chokeberry, even some hydrangea there. That's oak leaf hydrangea, itea, the fragrant sumac. So just, all of those were, beautiful fall color instead of burning bush. So lots of options there. And again, you just kind of have to know, is it really just the color you want, or is there something else about the burning bush that you're trying to replace? I will say that, blueberry is often used as a great alternative for burning bush because it does get the fall color, but they are a little more particular about their soils. So they are not kind of a, no problem, like plant it in and go, maybe like burning bushes. So it's not always the best alternative for folks if it's not going to work in their soils. They do take, a little more, you have to be sure they're in the right place to be happy. So you do have to kind of think through which alternative is really going to work for you. This is fragrant sumac, which is a gorgeous shrub. You often can find it now just as the species, 4 feet tall. It is a little gangly, but they have this really nice cultivar that they have, been using a lot. That's much shorter and very popular I love it for hillsides and erosion control. It's very natural looking, very, woody, and really blends into the forest. Has these great flowers for pollinators, and and all the benefits there. You have some different chokeberries. There's a red or a black, different color berries, a little bit of different leaf and bloom, but very similar. Again, gorgeous options for the burning bush. And then barberry, another really popular one. And besides being invasive, this one's also been linked to Lyme's disease through studies looking at mice hiding in it because it does have such a dense habit with the thorns. And so then, in the connection between mice and ticks and Lyme's disease. So, a lot of the research was done more in a wooded, out in the woods, not necessarily in your front yard, but it, the idea is still there that, having these can harbor mice that might, have ticks and Lyme's disease. And with all the increase we've been having lately, at least for me, I wouldn't want to have that anywhere near me if I didn't need to. So again, we have so many great native alternatives to get away from not only the just kind of ecological invasiveness of barberry, but then also some of the more human health implications now that we're finding related to it. And barberry in the woods will spread and take over, and to the point where maple saplings can't really grow and take a hold. So it's a problem for maple production. And so there's all sorts of issues with barberry. So you have 9-bark, which is actually pictured there at the bottom, those beautiful white flowers, bayberry, New Jersey tea, summer sweet, a native bush honeysuckle, which is the photo up top there with the little yellow flowers. So all of these are really nice alternatives. There's a 9-bark in all its glory. And then at the top left, that's one of the cultivars with a darker purple leaf. So if you really wanted that purple leaf on the Barbary, you could go with something like this to still have that ornamental aspect of the shrub, but then be getting away from all the invasiveness. And again, 9-bark is a very popular shrub. It comes in all sorts of heights and colors. So, you know, there's really probably one out there at the garden center for any kind of situation. New Jersey tea is a little less available. However, you know, as natives have been making a name for themselves, it is easier and easier to find places. And this is just a great shrub. You know, it grows all along the Hudson ice meadows with the butterfly weed, as seen pictured there. And, you know, I love this one for mass planting as well. It's really nice. Now, not to confuse you too much, right? But this is a little more nitty gritty, but if anyone's interested, you can always do a little more research. But there are actually some cultivars of some of these regulated species that you can now purchase. So even though Barbary is prohibited, there are some cultivars that they have shown to be sterile. And so now they are conditionally allowing them to be sold. The same thing with the silvergrass, the miscanthus and the euonymus. Again, those are regulated but conditionally sold, meaning they don't have to have an invasive label on them. And, you know, I mean, gosh, with a name like Crimson Cutie, who doesn't want to buy that? So, you know, there's a lot of marketing that goes into this stuff. But hopefully, if you're there, you see Crimson Cutie, you'll know that it's not so cute, and to pass it by and look for something else. Alrighty, so again, back to some more of these terrestrial plants that were prohibited, but these are some of the ones that are more likely something that, you know, people might have been planting with. Some of the first ones like garlic mustard, I doubt any of you were saying, oh no, what will I, you know, put in my garden now that I can't use garlic mustard? But, you know, cup plant, I've still seen planted places, garden loosestrife for sure. So some of these were still being used. So let's see, let's start with, what is that? Yellow flag iris, spurge, and garden loosestrife. So here are some of the options. Let's see, let's do our little no, no, and no options that we can be using instead. Blue flag iris, marsh marigold, shrubby sundrops, coreopsis, black-eyed Susan, and the list goes on really. Let's see, I've got blue flag, black-eyed Susans, and the coreopsis shown there in the photos. Now the blue flag works if you wanted something kind of like for a shoreline wet area. Obviously it doesn't work if you wanted something yellow, right? So again, you know, some of these alternatives might be better for you compared to others. Here's some shrubby sundrops. On the left is just the straight species, Odothera fruticosa. On the right is a selection called Fireworks. You can see how the seed pods are that much brighter red, making it a little showier. But otherwise, there's really not much of a difference. So, you know, in terms of benefits to pollinators and, you know, food webs and things like that, this is one of those, you know, if you can find Fireworks at the garden center, but not the other one, you know, I would go ahead with it personally if you know, were trying to stick with species. But again, it's really what you want for your garden and your landscape and what is going to work for you. This is just to give you an idea of yellow flag iris versus our native blue flag there in the back. When they're not in bloom, they can be hard to tell if you run across this along a shoreline, whether or not you've got yellow flag. You know, if you can, you could revisit again when it's in bloom to hopefully check it out. But if not, lots of times, right? And I know when they're not side by side, it's hard to compare, but there's a really big size difference. I mean, yellow flag is just so much larger than our native blue flag. And so again, we want to avoid the yellow flag. And let's see, and here's another example too of the seed pods. So if they're past bloom, but you have seed pods and you can get an idea, that can also really help you. you can at least, get those seed pods off and keep them from floating downstream. But the yellow flag seed pods are even just, that much larger than the native blue flag. Okay, cup plant is another one that is still planted sometimes, or was, right now it's prohibited, but you can still, see it in gardens. And so, if somebody says, oh, hey, I've got this really tall, beautiful yellow flower that's spreading everywhere, I've got some extra, do you want me to dig it up and give some to you for your garden? And you're thinking, oh, yes, I do. Think again, make sure it's not cup plant. But there are lots of other great, tall, yellow, native alternatives that you could be using in your garden as well. So lots of things there. No need for cup plant. Again, these are some of the other plants that, again, we're more likely to be gardening with still. None of these are regulated or prohibited from DEC. So essentially, these kind of didn't make the cut as highly enough invasive to regulate. So they kind of came out in this medium category when they were assessed. So, that's not to say there's still maybe something you don't want in your garden. Like, I really don't want goutweed in my garden. I spent a very long time trying to get rid of it. But I don't know if you have a natural area somewhere and you're trying to hold it back between your lawn and the woods, maybe you don't mind it over there. But please don't give it to your neighbor because it can really spread. So these are things that would be more considered, like a garden nuisance, maybe not rising to the level of invasive, or, invasive, but just not maybe, to the level of, like the regulatory invasive. They're not regulated that way, but there's still something that we want to avoid. And there's goutweed, holding, the line between the lawn and the woods somewhere, taking over. Even you can even see like the raspberries, the brambles are getting taken over by the goutweed in that photo. So instead of things like goutweed or periwinkle or vinca or ivy, we have lots of beautiful native ground covers for shade, and these are all pretty readily available. So foam flower is something you can most definitely find. Wild geranium, golden Alexanders is getting easier to find, and wild ginger as well. So there's lots of great options out there instead of these other things. Again, bunchberry, wintergreen, just lots of options. On the bottom there, that's our native anemone, Canada anemone, and it's actually, as you can see in that photo, a very aggressive spreader and actually good on sunnier sites. So, it's going to really fill in too, but it is considered native. So it would be a much better selection for, a large area than something like a goutweed. And these are some more photos. Top left, that's the wild geranium or the crane's bill. In the middle, that's the pachyra, the golden ragwort. And then the anemone up top again. Bottom left is the bearberry. And then that's Waldstenia or the barren strawberry on the bottom right. And that's a great one. It does great in sun. It can take a lot of shade as well. It has those really pretty flowers and no fruit though, right? That's why it's called barren strawberry. It's barren. But otherwise, it's a lot of fun. Now we also have foxglove and Dame's rocket, two more that we want to avoid. And foxglove, and Dame's rocket. Now Dame's rocket is the one that I will hear, people ask, like, do you have that spring phlox? That spring phlox that I see blooming on the side of the road, I want that. So it is not phlox, it's something called Dame's rocket. If you get up close, it only has 4 petals instead of 5. And so you don't want that, unfortunately. I know you do, but I'm telling you, you don't. But here are some alternatives that you could have instead. There's fireweed, which, grows up there. I've seen it on the side of the road a lot of places. Lavender hyssop, blazing star, all sorts of things. Here's the hyssop on the left. This is a selection of false dragonhead, also known as obedient plant. on the right called Pink Manners. It also comes in, white is its plain, but you can get it in pink. These are a bunch of great phlox options, from tall to short, from sun to shade. However, I will say if you have deer, these might not be the best option for you, as the deer do tend to love phlox. On the left is kind of the traditional blazing star that some of you gardeners might be familiar with from the garden center, but there's actually a number of other native blazing stars as well, rough blazing star, and some other ones that are becoming more and more readily available as well. And these are just fabulous, especially the rock blazing star, the Liatris aspera. It blooms later in the fall when the monarchs are actually coming through the area. So it's a really good one for them, in addition to like the Joe Pye weeds and the asters, much more so than the dense blazing star that's more common, which is beautiful and great, but it blooms earlier. So if you're interested in monarchs, some of these other blazing stars are, a good thing for you. This is Penstemon, which is available in all sorts of selections. That's it in the top left, just the plain species, Penstemon Digitalis. There's actually a number of species native to our area, and a number of different selections that they've been breeding with different colored foliage, something darker and showier. They have some shorter ones, some taller ones. So you have some options there, anything from just the straight species to something else if you're, looking for something a little more particular. Japanese spirea and butterfly bush are also two shrubs that we want to get away from and use our native shrubs instead, right? Of course, I know it's hard. It's named butterfly bush, and yes, it indeed does attract butterflies, but you can kind of liken it to like, I don't like to name things in particular, but we'll just say McDonald's, and but fast food, any sort of fast food, right? Like, it might taste great, it'd be quick and convenient, but it's not, it's not the healthy meal that you need. And so that's the same for butterflies. We want to get them onto our native plants. And that's a similar story for the shrubby honeysuckle with their berries. Those berries are just pretty much like sugar water. They don't have the protein and things that the birds need to build up their fuel for making it through either the winter or migrating. So again, it's like a great quick snack and they're drawn to them, but it's actually not good for them. Here's the summer sweet on the left. And then up top, again, you can get it in ruby spice or vanilla spice. They have all sorts of options there. Meadowsweet on the bottom, not quite as easy to find commercially, but again, I've seen it more and more places, and that's a great option. And again, that grows very well up there in the Adirondacks. I've seen some great patches of it. So, okay, take a breath from that whirlwind of plants. But just to remind you, why are we talking about all of these? Why natives? Really because they can be beautiful and functional. So depending on what you're trying to do in your yard, you can still have, a beautiful backyard, you have options, but yet you can be providing function and really helping with, ecological integrity in your own backyard, which is, is more and more important. I know in the Adirondacks, sometimes you might kind of, I don't want to say forget, but you're so lucky to be there and have all that amazing natural area around you, but a lot of other places don't. And so the role that backyards are playing is really becoming more and more important in connecting natural areas just with overall our areas in terms of providing habitats and places for our pollinators. So let's see how we're doing on time. I think we're doing pretty well. So I just wanted to show you a few examples. Sometimes it's like, great, you can see pretty photos, but like, how do you actually use these plants in a landscape? So it's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's rainy and cold when you're planting, but that actually makes for good planting weather, right? So here we are laying out some plants, and what I really want to draw your attention to is in the, let's see, the bottom left corner, kind of where it says October 2012, that is sweet fern, Comptonia. This is a great native low shrub. It's a nitrogen fixer, so it's great for poor soils. You know, you don't need to water it. You don't need to fertilize it, you know, none of that stuff. It does want sun though, you know, a fair bit of sun. But again, this is just a really great workhorse for natural plantings. And so there it is kind of coming in the next year. And again, when you look at this photo, to me, you know, yes, there was a hole in the woods, right? And we had to go in and plant it. But to me, it looks pretty natural still. Like we've got some nice grass with some fall color, some greenery, you know, some little red in the front. I think that's the low bush blueberry, you know, kind of going in with the natural landscape there. You know, if you could imagine instead like a row of barberry or a row of boxwood, you know, with a row of mums or something in front of it, you know, the kinds of things you see, you know, it would have a very different, you know, feel to this picture, I think. I think it would evoke a very different feeling. So just going back to that idea of natives, you know, helping to provide a sense of place as well, I think can, you know, be pretty important as well. Now, prepare yourselves because sometimes plants grow a little too well, right? I'm not gonna lie, this apparently this soil was very poor and this Comptonia really enjoyed its spot there. So, you know, another thing we'll talk about is maintenance, right? We said these things were low maintenance, not no maintenance. So, I mean, this thing is up there, you know, it's getting no love or attention. It's very low maintenance, but it's doing a little too well and is going to need some weeding if you want to knock it back. Maybe you don't, and you're more than happy to have it take over the spot, which is great. And then it's doing its job. But again, it just depends on where you're gardening. If you have a bigger area that you want to fill, if you have a smaller area that you want to keep a little neater and under control, you know, these are all things to think about. So, you know, I don't promise that everything always, you know, goes according to plan. Not gonna lie, I didn't think it would be that successful in that site. I'm very happy that it was, but it's a spreader, so keep that in mind. And there it is up close with its little seed pods. It's pretty cute. It's called sweet fern, but it's not a fern, it's a shrub, and it has a really nice scent when you brush it and go through it too. And there it is actually in that other photo, kind of on the bottom on a hillside as well, up there in Lake Placid getting established. So it's very hardy, great up there. Here's just some example for some dry shade. So again, the sweet fern was kind of like maybe steep slopes, poor soils, sandy soils, sun. That's a great stabilizer. Here, you know, or, you know, ferns, even some grasses for some dry shade. So again, we had there was like some construction work here with some septic work and things like that that had kind of totally ruined this site. And so we were just trying to kind of bring it back and then maybe, you know, add a little bit more, give it a little more extra greenery than maybe it had originally had. And so really going with ferns and sedges and native ground covers. We did do some honeysuckle, some shrubby honeysuckle here, some phlox, some things like that, that were doing great for a while. And then actually a few years in, a few things changed and we started getting more deer through the property than we had. And they did start nibbling at a few things that they hadn't originally, and we had to do some adjusting. So again, you know, these things do take maintenance, things change as you go. Maybe you have deer, you lose deer. I think if you're lucky enough to lose deer, I think more people are just, you know, getting deer problems that they didn't have before maybe. But all things that you've got to think about. Another property up there in North Creek. This one had two interesting things that I wanted to show you. One was this, you know, hillside type thing kind of left over from construction that we really wanted to just fill back in and stabilize and naturalize. And then two, you know, they didn't really need such a big open area and they didn't want, you know, a traditional lawn. So we planted it with a sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, sometimes called oak sedge or Pennsylvania sedge. But it's, you know, this great low growing, low maintenance lawn alternative for these woody areas because it's meant to grow in shade and it just stays low. You don't have to mow it. And then again, on that hillside, you can kind of see we're using this low growth sumac that again is a, you know, shorter selection of the native sumac. but that's really all they've changed about it. And so it works really well to just kind of fill in hillsides and stabilize them, but leave them, pretty natural, just going right back to the woods. So here is the Carex all planted out. And then I wish I'd been back to have a photo for you to show you it filled in, but I don't, but maybe I'll make it by one day and get one of those. I'd love to. And this is just another example. This is at New England Wildflower Society in Massachusetts. This was their example of a Carex Pennsylvanica lawn at their site there for inspiration to show people, that this is something that you could do. This is that low-growth sumac again at another lake, just showing you again when you have these slopes, something that you can do. And on the bottom, you can see we've just totally filled it with that sumac. It's going to be, a great stabilization, fall color, provide habitat. And then I think on the left there, those are just some native grasses and things that are just going to fill in that boulder wall and, keep everything in place. Here is the fragrant sumac in all its glory in nature. This is not the selection. This is just a clump of straight species sumac I happened to cross on the shorelines of Lake George one day. And there's just the photo looking back at it. And in the photo, it's actually, it's mixed in with something else there. The greenery is juniper, but then, looking out on the lake. So you can just see its gorgeous fall color. A little bit of info, again, it's very hardy down to zone 2. If you get that selection, it stays very low, 2 to 3 feet. Again, the native is a little kind of gangly and leggy at 4 to 5 feet, I'd say. And it kind of like it leaves out at the top, more, and it's kind of leggy on the bottom, almost like a lilac. So again, maybe that's great for you and, go with it. But, a lot of times that's not necessarily the best for a landscaping situation. And this works as well. Deer resistant, drought tolerant, sun to part shade. Again, just a really adaptable one. Let's see, I thought this was going to be a blank, but anyway, so just planted, and then let's look at the dates, 11 to 14, so 3 years. And they really say you've got to wait 3 years, and this isn't just for native landscaping, this is for any landscaping. For plants, you have to give them some time to fill in. So you plant and then, right, and then you have to wait. It's not instant. And you might have to go in and, add some things and subtract some things. But, you'll get there. Some of you might have heard the saying, see if I can get it right. Year 1, they sleep. Year 2, they creep. Year 3, they leap, right? So it's really that 3rd year that you'll really kind of see like, okay, this is where I am. And then, you can really, kind of make some big changes then, but you want to try to have a little patience up until then. This is just that same property from another angle. That plant on the bottom there is called Bearberry, Arctostaphylos. It's another just great, super hardy native ground cover. As you can see, they're very low, great spreader. Great for poor, it wants a poor sandy soil. You can't plant it in anything too rich. So again, a real great one. On the left in that photo, that's the sweet fern or the Comptonia, starting down on the hillside to hold things in place. And then on the right, that's actually a little blue stem. And just some more photos to show you things filling in. And again, really to show you actually the Bearberry is what I wanted to show you in these photos, was kind of planted to like soften up all those boulders and those stairs. And so it really, as it's filling in and just kind of growing over, but staying very low and manageable, it's doing that. And then you can see, it's really just starting to even cover the boulders and fill across. So again, giving it a much more natural look. This is that plant. This is Bearberry, Arctostaphylos. Has these great little berries, has great flowers that the pollinators love. Again, full sun, very hardy, spreads out well, just all around a really nice one to use. Here's a photo of meadowsweet. Some of you might recognize that photo driving up through the notch there to Keene along the lake. And again, this one is becoming more and more available that you can, purchase to actually use. And its sister, Steeple Bush, our other native spirea, which I absolutely love. In the photo there, it's on the left. It's almost as showy as that phlox in terms of its, when you grow it in the garden and it has room, it really can, look quite nice and pretty. Oftentimes when you see it in a field and it's out there like really competing with goldenrod and asters and other field species, you just get, one stalk, one flower at a time, kind of here or there. But a lot of these plants, if you put them in a garden setting, and plant them to get them started and mulch around them, it's a whole different, game for them. They can really take off and you can get a much more, kind of like garden looking plant out of them than you necessarily might think you'd get from when you maybe have seen them out in nature. So another one that's really nice like that is Deervella. This is our native honeysuckle. So not to be confused with the invasive shrubby honeysuckles. This is a honeysuckle, but it's, an entirely different genus and species. It's Deervella. It's a low grower, sun to shade, great flowers, some fall color. Again, just a really hardy, good workhorse of a plant. No, it's not like a specimen kind of like showy species. I wouldn't put one of these, at the front of my door. But I would definitely fill an area with them, fill a hillside, fill a side yard, all sorts of things where I wanted some nice shrubbery. And the same with the New Jersey tea. Just, again, covered in pollinators, great, has these cute little seeds too in the fall, these like little black seeds. Well, I think they're cute, but so those are just a few more plants that could be some great alternatives. And then now we still have a few more minutes. So I just wanted to kind of go over a few basics about actually using all of these plants that we've been talking about. And some of these are kind of just landscaping and gardening guidelines in general, versus, some of them maybe a little more native specific. But in general, what we want to do to, kind of mimic nature and these natural ecosystems is, avoid straight lines. That doesn't look like nature. So, if you've got a property line or something that you're planting along, that's fine, but try to maybe, have the line not be straight, or at least just maybe add some layers. So instead of just that row, maybe you can add some shrubs and then some flowers underneath it. Not only are you providing more layers, which is great for, diversity overall in the food web, right? The different birds use different layers, different insects, things like that. But you're also then taking up less lawn, which is great. So that we're not having that higher maintenance lawn there. Instead, we're having, this landscape. So there's a number of benefits, and it's going to look more natural as well. And so again, these diverse plantings are gonna, they're gonna resist disease, weeds, all sorts of things much better as well, because they're gonna create healthier, communities right in your own backyard. And so in terms of them being, low maintenance and successful, it all goes together. So, we're talking something like this. There's still a lawn area. This is really mainly a path in this photo, but you can see how there's all these layers to these plantings. And yes, this is like actually a photo by Rick Dark, who has a number of books out there. So no, this is not my backyard. This is gorgeous, and this has taken a while to accomplish. But this is kind of, the idea of what we're talking about with the layers and the shrubs and the natural areas. So you've really got to have some of this in mind before you go to the garden center, right? Okay, so make a list and check it twice. Or if you're like me, check it more than twice. Because what's going to happen, or, at least if you're like me, is you're going to go there and you're going to be like, ooh, it's been a long, cold, gray, dreary winter. Look at all these gorgeous plants, right? And before you know it, your cart's going to be full. You're not going to have looked at, the zone, right, to even know if they're going to work where you live. You're not going to have looked at sun or shade or bloom time or anything. You're just going to have kind of and like, I need this, I need that. And you're gonna have one of this and one of that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, congratulations, you have much better restraint than I do. But I know this happens to a lot of us. So you really want to plan ahead before you get out there. You know, you might also have been getting your plant catalogs in the mail these last couple of months. Maybe you're already in trouble and you've already put in a lot of orders. But again, you know, that could be something that we've been looking at and kind of like waiting and waiting. And then when we get to the garden center, sometimes we can, you know, necessarily forget some of these goals that we had in mind. So, because whether or not we're talking about natives or any kind of plant, right, you still have to put the right plant in the right place. You know, natives are not miracle workers. You can't put like Bearberry, something that loves, you know, full sun in a dry soil, like plop it into a shady wetland, you know, and then say, I don't understand, it was native, it's adapted to this zone, you know, our area, like, why didn't it work? Right, so we still do have to consider all these basics, just like any kind of gardening or landscape, thinking about our zone, our sun, our soils. Again, thinking about your aesthetics and your design or your function, or even the, you know, the reality. I know somebody asked me to talk about pinkster azaleas. Oh God, I love those, right? You know, reality wise though, they're a little trickier to grow. They're more specific. They're hard to find. You can find them, but they're not very available. And when you do find them, they're going to be pretty pricey. So then if you go ahead and kill it, you know, it's going to be a bigger deal potentially than something less pricey. So I'm not saying don't do it. If you find one, go for it if you want one. But these are just all considerations to keep in mind. Again, if you're trying to plant for pollinators or birds or something, you know, in particular, you can really make your list ahead of time so you know, you kind of stay on track with what you're looking for. And I'm not saying you can't just throw something into the cart here and there. We all do that. But I'm just trying to help you out so you don't get in trouble like I do when I get home. Now, this is the Hardiness Zone Map, which many of you might already be familiar with. I myself threw that Adirondack outline on there. So if it's not exact, if you notice it doesn't quite match up with a line, you know, that was me. I did the best I could to kind of overlay it on this map. But I just wanted to show you, you know, a lot of the Adirondacks is actually a 4 at this point. And I know a lot of people in the past, you know, I've talked to, it's always kind of been like, we're zone 3, we're zone 3. And some of the area up there is. But you know, these maps were updated. Oh gosh, I'm gonna date myself because now it's been a while, but it was, you know, at one point I paid attention to maps before they were updated. Let's see, what is that? Maybe these were updated, well, with the minimums through 2005, but then I'm sure it took them a while to actually update the maps. But again, you know, things are warmer. Unfortunately, you know, we won't get into that discussion, but they are. And so in terms of looking at these plants, you do have some more options up there now in general going into the zone 4s, unless you're in where there's a 3, you know, and again, these are averages. So if we have a hard winter, your 4s might die. I know some people like to err on the side of caution, so you really want to stick with a 3. You know, again, it just depends. You know, sometimes I say, you know, buy 1 or 2 of something, try it out, see if it works, you know, before you fill a garden or a hillside with something. I mean, that's always a good idea. But I just wanted to be sure that everybody, you know, go online, take a look. You can zoom in, you can put in the zip code, you know, and you can zoom right in on those maps and really see where you are in terms of what your zone is, where you're landscaping, right? And then again, you know, be thinking about your goals. So maybe you're interested in using some of these natives for birds, right? So, you know, blueberry, chokeberry, viburnum, dogwood, all of those got red fall foliage. So those are all great alternatives for burning bush, but they're also, you know, great native plants with healthy, you know, berries that provide fat content for birds in the fall. So, you know, they might be something on your list. If maybe you had wanted burning bush, but now you don't, but you also want birds. So again, you know, you can kind of think through what it is that you're interested in. mean, there are really native plants for pretty much anything. There's a lot of native edible shrubs, these beach plums. This is Prunus maritima. Those are the plums up top. I mean, you know, those are a lot of fun. Aronia, blueberry, elderberry, the more traditional ones, you know, lots of options. If you have deer as an issue, there are plants that are deer resistant. I will tell you though, they are resistant and deer don't read lists. So deer will eat what deer want to eat. You know, you might have to try a few things out. You know, that's the serviceberry they're under, which is on the top of this, you know, supposed deer resistant list. Although I don't know that they were eating that. They were eating a lot of other things there that day. So again, deer will eat some plants at one house that I've been working on, and down the road somewhere else, they're not eating them there. Sometimes it's very frustrating what the rhyme or reason is to what they're eating. You know, it's going to have just to do with what else they have to eat in that area. So you might have to do a little bit of, you know, trying things out on your own, at your own property. And again, you know, get one of something and stick it out there and see what happens, before you know, do a whole hedgerow of something and then the deer eat the whole hedgerow. You know, plants for hummingbirds, there's lots of great options. We often think of, you know, bee balm, but, you know, you want to have something maybe for hummingbirds first when they come back in the spring. And so wild columbine is going to be that early spring bloomer. It's pretty much timed with when the ruby throat hummingbirds will be back in the area. So that's a great one to have. And then you can have, you know, lobelia or bee balm for later in the summer. And then maybe, you know, a blazing star or something for a little later even. So, you know, again, have these lists, or kind of be thinking about what you're interested in, to help guide you, because otherwise, you know, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes with, you know, the number of plants available. If you're really interested in a pollinator garden, again,
Emily?
you know, natural pollinator areas have, you know, a lot of species, but there's been some research shown that something as, you know, 8 to 10 species could be like a really good foundation in your yard. So, you know, instead of going out and buying one of this and one of this and one of that, you want to try to, you know, clump things together and buy a few, you know, of lesser species than necessarily one of more.
Hey, Emily,
don't forget your grasses. They're really important as well. I know we all tend to kind of go to the pretty flowers and the shrubs, but grasses are actually really important as well. And again, if you're just thinking about this is, you know, kind of pollinator specific, but also just general, it's, you know, it's nice for your garden to have color, you know, year round as well, you know, choosing plants that are going to bloom throughout these different seasons. And again, another thing to think about is avoiding these sterile selections. So like we talked about with cultivars a little bit at the beginning, but on the left, those are natives. You've got a coneflower up top and bloodroot on the bottom. And then on the right, you know, those are cultivars that are essentially going to be sterile and not have any pollinator benefit based on their structure. So they've been made to look, you know, very aesthetically, you know, noticeable, but there really is no longer any kind of pollinator or ecosystem benefit. So, you know, I would recommend avoiding those, or at least, you know, using those in moderation if there's something that you really want to have.
Hey, Emily,
avoid
it's Becca.
Invasive.
Emily, it's Becca. I just wanted to do a time check. It's about 11:15.
Yeah.
So we could wrap up in like the next 5 or 7 minutes. That'll leave us a little bit of time for Q&A.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Alrighty. So planting and establishment of these gardens, right? Natives like other natives. So unlike toddlers with plates where the food can't touch, you know, you want these plants to touch. Again, we're mimicking natural landscapes. So, you know, you don't necessarily want to be able to walk all around your plants in a sea of mulch and have to mulch year after year. You know, you want these things to connect. So this is like a not this, more of a that. And just a little more tips about pollinator gardens. Again, you know, kind of planting in these larger clumps is nice. And these are just some photos just to give you some ideas of, you know, getting gardens established. So there it is being planted in 15. you know, kind of growing in 16, and there it is in 17, looking pretty good already. And that's a blue paradise phlox in the front and a smooth hydrangea in the back. Here's another garden again. Let's see, planting. Oh no. Oh, there it is. Let's see, I lost the time on this one, but I think this is 2014 or 15 there. So it took a year or two, and then here it is coming in 17. You know, so again, you know, if you get the right plant in the right place, these things will fill in, but you know, it does take a little bit of time. And again, these are just a year later, kind of showing you the progress. So with any garden, you need to have a plan for watering. And I mean like a serious plan. So not like a gallon jug or my child. But you know, again, it's the first season, they're just getting going. You know, don't leave it to chance. Be sure to be out there watering. Like I said, they are low maintenance, but they're not no maintenance. So you need to water, you know, weed is needed. You know, and again, these are just kind of like, these are general gardening tips. These aren't really specific to natives. But there's, you know, a huge chunk of crabgrass right there in the middle of the coneflowers and the penstemon and, you know, and the tufted hairgrass. So you do have to get out there and weed as these things are filling in. And, you know, these are some weeds out of one of my native gardens that I had up by the road that I entirely planted, you know, a brand new garden, totally native. And I was constantly having to weed shrubby honeysuckle, smooth buckthorn, wild grape, and oriental bittersweet seedlings out. And that's just how you can tell it's the bittersweet with the orange root. But again, I was drawing in the birds with my native garden, and there were other places where there were invasives and they were bringing the seeds in. So even though you're not planting invasives, they're in the area. And so you do have to constantly be keeping them out of your natural areas. You know, it's great to leave the gardens up in the fall and the winter to provide structure and food, and then, you know, maybe do some cleanup in the spring, but you don't necessarily need to be out there cleaning up. You know, you can prune your shrubs if you want, but as you can see here, this is summer sweet. You know, it's going to go ahead and bloom the next year, even if you haven't bothered, you know, to deadhead it and prune it, kind of, you know, as a more traditional gardener would. Avoid pesticides, right, when we're planting these things, of course. You know, and a little bit of order can go a long way. So there's been a lot of research kind of showing these more natural areas to people, called neatniks, right, in a lovingly way, that, you know, people might get more and more kind of anxious or apprehensive seeing these large natural areas, you know, in kind of more controlled neighborhood settings. And so really just small cues for caring, such as keeping a strip mode in front, or even installing like a little border, a fence, some stones, really shows that that's a purposeful, you know, garden, that you've planted those things there. It's not an unkept area. And so that can make a really big difference for adding natives. Because again, natives, you know, there's a bit of a misconception that it's going to look like a weedy side of the road, when in fact, these things aren't native at all. You know, natives, you know, we've got lots of flowers, but you do have to weed and maintain. You can see this is our native sunflower, and it can really take over. This is a front of a house that we did. This is 100% native. That's, you know, a 9-bark and inkberry shrubs on the front instead of a boxwood. So another native holly. So again, you know, you can use natives and have it be very kept looking. This is just a house I went by. I went, ooh, because I saw the plants, but then I also went, I don't know, it looks pretty messy. But again, you know, just something like, if that front part had been, you know, kept up a little more or something, you know, then that can really make a big difference. Not that it bothers me, but, you know, just, you know, I don't know how their neighbors feel. So it's just all things to think about. We don't want to be giving natives a bad name. We want to make sure that everyone understands that they have great benefits for the environment, but that they can also fit into, you know, any number of landscapes. So I think I'll end it there just to make sure, you know, if you're kind of like, where do I start? Maybe you have invasives and you're thinking, you know, I can't get rid of them all, or gosh, you know, that would be a lot of plants to buy to, you know, have all these natives. You know, don't get overwhelmed. You know, just every little bit that you could do helps. You know, it's really kind of the absence of any natives that's the problem. So even if you can just start adding in a few here and there where it works, you know, when you go to the garden center, now you're looking for them, then that's great. You know, you don't have to go out there and tear out every last burning bush or whatever might have already been on your property. But next time you go to the garden center, you know, don't buy another one. Again, you know, some research from Doug Tallamy, he's talking a lot more about, you know, ecosystem connectivity, is saying, you know, you want to aim for 70% woody natives. Again, kind of saying you could have 30%, you know, of that other stuff. But even if that's too much for you, you know, just do whatever you can and really kind of, you know, start with trying to just shrink your lawn and do a few things and get going that way. Again, you know, looking at some of these plant lists. So I'll end there. I had a little bit about jumping worms at the end, but let me just go ahead and stop so we have time for questions, because this was kind of one other related invasive that could come into your gardens. And actually, if people are dying to hear about them, we can do it with the questions. Or I know Becca said there's another presentation available recorded on the APIP website with jumping worm info. So thank you.